Here we go. Good. Everything is looking and feeling good. I'm going to zoom this out a little bit. Nice, nice, nice. Feeling good. We'll let other people get a few more minutes to get into here. Do. What's going on, everybody? Out there in radio land, can everybody hear me? If there's anybody watching, can I get a thumbs up on the sound? Check 2. Couple joining in. We got some thumbs up. How is everybody this evening? We are going to be drinking some whiskey, some good ass whiskey. And as we go along, I'm hoping there might be a lot of the whiskey people from my whiskey pages who are old grizzled dogs just like me. But I'm hoping, in a way, there's a lot of you newer people who may look, maybe you follow me from wrestling and you're like, yeah, I just want to pop in and say hi and see what you're going to talk about. And maybe I can teach you a thing about tasting whiskey and stuff like that. I'll go through kind of the tasting process and like what people who are really dorky and like super into whiskey, how they drink it and how they get so dorky about it. And when you see them sniffing glasses and you're like, what the hell are they talking about? I love Fred Minnick's one of my buddies, but sometimes you watch a show and you're like, what is marzipan? Where is he getting this note for? What is a finish? What is how do you do this without burning your face off? That kind of a thing. I like spreading that to new people. So cool to see a couple people in here. Cousins and Cards, cool. James from Twitch. What's going on? Ian is in the house as well. That's awesome. I'm glad you guys could stop in. Hopefully we get a couple more people as we go. As usual, this will be up on the Wrestling with Whiskey YouTube page in perpetuity. Please like, comment, subscribe, ask questions, suggest ideas, what you'd want to see here, what kind of whiskey you want to learn about, what kind of activities, whether it's tasting, nosing, more barrel picking things, what kind of footage you would like to see. We've got a couple ideas down in the pipe, but I want to hear from you guys. So Kookie's in the house too. So I love it. Some of the Twitch float over everywhere. Live streaming is everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. It is the modality of now. You guys can quote me on that shit. Pardon my French. But we'll get going here in a minute. I'll give people just another minute to pop on in. Like I said, please fire away with any questions. I will try to get to them as we're going along. I'm going to focus a lot on the tasting because I want to spread the word on some of the stuff that Bardstown's doing. I think they're doing some really, really cool stuff. I think they're doing some incredible work blending and sourcing, some incredible partnerships on the finishing process is very, very cool. I've always been a big proponent of theirs. I'm yet to be truly disappointed by something that's come out of that house. And they're a relatively new company. So if you haven't seen, some of my previous videos, I've tasted one or two of these before in short form. We had a long conversation with a couple of the upper tier employees of Bardstown Bourbon Company not too long ago with Baron Corbin and Greg Hamilton as well. So check that out. It's a couple videos now and one of the more recent ones. Great chat. Always a great insight from Dan Calloway and John Hargrove, who's the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, I believe. Please, John, if I got your title wrong, don't crucify me. But yeah, so if you are into whiskey, fantastic. If you're not, hopefully this will teach you something new. And maybe if you're into other spirits too, because I want to learn about tequila. I want to learn about rum more. I want to learn about brandy. Maybe not vodka. I'll toe Fred Minnick's line with that one. But yeah, all right. So we got 5 minutes in. Let's get into the meat of the discussion. So today we're going to be talking about Bardstown Bourbon Company and their Discovery. There we go. Let's focus in. Their Discovery series. So this is the newest release, but they've done 3 altogether so far. And for those who don't know, what the Bardstown Bourbon Company is doing with this release, and here's one of the older ones. This bottle is signed by several members of the distiller, including Master Distiller Steve Nally, who has a long history in bourbon and in whiskey. He's a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer. This guy has been around the block. And a lot of people would say if you have something signed, it's like memorabilia, right? And in the bourbon world, we dork out. We get bottles signed by distillers that you guys have never heard of, and we geek out over it. So you might wonder, why? Why are you opening that bottle? Well, I will tell you, because Steve Nally himself, I have a different bottle that's signed, and he told me, he goes, I will only sign this if you're going to open it, drink it, and enjoy it. And I love that. Because there's so many people who put these rare bottles up as trophies and they never touch them. And that's great. I get it's like collecting baseball cards. But to me, whiskey is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be shared with friends. And even when we can't be with each other physically, like this, I want to share it with you because that's one of my passions, is just talking about it and sharing what makes me go gaga over it. So what Bardstown Bourbon is doing with this series and release is what they call sourcing. But this is very special sourcing. Now, none of the whiskey in this, they made none of it. And what I love is they're very open about it. So what we can do is we can take a look here, and this might be gibberish for some people right now. But if you look, we have a breakdown of the mash bills that are in this blend. So we've got different years, different mash bills, which in the mash bill is the grain used to mash and then turn into ferment and turn into alcohol and then eventually into whiskey. So it says 4 different whiskeys ranging in years from 5 years old all the way up to 13 years old. So that's pretty old. Bourbon usually is peak at about 7, 8, 10 years. 13 is a little old, but sometimes you can hit those sweet points at 13, 14, 15, even into the high teens sometimes. And so, right, for example, most of the 75% of this blend is an 11-year, 7-month bourbon from Kentucky. These are all Kentucky sourced bourbons. So when I say source, it means that Bardstown Bourbon Company went out and bought a bunch of barrels of that older whiskey, because Bardstown Bourbon Company is only about 4 years old, 5 years old. So they have their own stuff aging, but it's still very young. And so in the meantime, they've gone out and bought big stocks of this older bourbon, blended it together in a blend that they think tastes amazing. And then they bottled it. And so this is kind of their premium line, because you saw the ages on there. They're pretty old. And to age something that long costs a lot of money. There's a lot of taxes. It takes up space in your warehouses. And you're losing a lot of it to evaporation over the years anyway. So like that's very valuable liquid in there. So the older it is, the more expensive it is. It's pretty simple. And there's a lot of older whiskeys in there. So these bottles are all about $130 off the shelf, depending on where you get it. So it is in the premium range. But trust me when I tell you, these are premium products. So, but what's going to be fun going through these is the first 2, Series 1 and Series 2, are the exact same blend, except everything is a year older in Series 2 because they just kept the same barrels, blended it together, but everything had aged in between the first 2. So it's just the same breakdown. Here I have number 2. Oh, wait, pardon me. I'm wrong, actually. There's 1 less whiskey in here in Series 2. See, even I'm learning things. So in Series 2, I'm going to get the camera holding out of the way. There's only 3 whiskeys, and that goes 10 to 14 years. So again, they have these other stocks. They have these other stocks that are in there, and they blended those together to make what they thought was going to be the best blend. And then we have Series 3, which just came out, just hit the shelves. I remember when we talked with Dan Calloway and John Hargrove at Bardstown Bourbon Company, me, Baron Corbin, and Greg Hamilton, they told us we were some of the first to try this whiskey in the entire country. So I felt very, very lucky. And now I want to share it with you. So this introduced another mechanism into the thing. If you see there, it's not all Kentucky. This one introduces an Indiana bourbon. And now I'm going to get to the tasting. I promise. I'm going to nerd out just a little bit longer. Indiana bourbon is kind of a high sign for those of us who know the bourbon and whiskey industry, because there's a distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, pretty much the only big distillery in Indiana. There are some small ones, but that's been making whiskey for years. It used to be owned by Seagram's, which is a huge whiskey, Canadian whiskey conglomerate, but they have contract distilled for so many people over the years. And they're very famous for their high rye mash bills. I told you about the mash bill. That's the ingredients. A lot of rye grain, which makes a very spicy, bold whiskey. So in recent years, nerds and collectors have really sought after any craft distillery or anybody like this who sources their whiskey from that distillery. It's very highly sought after because their stuff is expensive. It's usually well aged and it's spicy and bold and it tastes very, very good. And so you're seeing less and less of it these days too. So that's a lot of the word vomit, just kind of explaining the series, explaining what it is. So now we get to the fun part, and let's taste it. Again, this is Bardstown Bourbon Company Discovery Series 1, 2, and 3. So Michael, you're just jumping in. That's what we're doing. You can always go back and watch the nerdy stuff that I was doing. But this is the signed bottle of Discovery number 1 that I'm going to pour in here. So what we're using here is a Glencairn glass. Right? You can kind of see the shape of it. It's got that wide bulbous bottom and then it tulips to the top. The purpose of that, and these are Glencairn, these are developed in Scotland. They're originally for Scotch, obviously. But it's the same idea, kind of like wine or any other spirit or stuff like that. This helps you nose it. So it'll drive the scent and the aroma up to the top, collecting in the bottom, and then driving it to the top. Jordan, welcome in. There you go. Starlight Distillery is one of the smaller distilleries in Indiana, but they've been gaining a lot of ground lately. Absolutely. So in here we have Bardstown Discovery Series number 1, which I will read off very quickly. It's 10% 5-year Kentucky bourbon, 10% 10-year Kentucky bourbon, 75% 11-year 7-month Kentucky bourbon, and 5% 13-year Kentucky bourbon. Now, I don't have time to do it with you right now. I should have done it before the stream, but you can probably, with a little bit of research and a little bit of Googling, those mash bills that are on the label, you can find out kind of what distilleries use those. They don't really disclose it, but with a little bit of research, a little bit of elbow grease, you can find. I wish I would have had it listed out before, but if you're into it, go Google, go back and watch when I showed the mash bills on the camera. You can Google what comes from where. There's Heaven Hill, there's Wild Turkey, there's Four Roses, there's Barton, there's Beam, there's all kinds of places they could be getting. So the first thing you want to do with a glass of whiskey is you want to look at the light. This one, to me, I don't do as much with, just because if it's been in there for more than a couple of years, it's going to be very copper, amber, dark. But some whiskeys will be much darker than others, depending on the finish, depending on the age. So this solid, beautiful amber. Then you look at the legs. Silly sounding thing, the legs on a whiskey, but you swirl, and no, it's not a sin to swirl. Some people think it is. And you can kind of see how the whiskey drips down the glass. Kind of hard to see in the camera, but you'll see it's making streaks down as you go. And sometimes they're thick. Sometimes they're very short. Sometimes they move quickly. Sometimes they move slow like molasses. Generally, the older, higher proof it is, the less watered down, the slower, thicker the legs are. So that can give you, before even smelling it, before even tasting it, give you a very, very vague, again, it's not universal, but a vague idea of kind of how high the proof is, how high the age might be. And then the next step is one of my favorite parts of the whole process, which is nosing. There are some whiskeys I could nose all day long. It's just, oh, you get different things every time you smell it. That being said, if you are new to whiskey, make sure you are prepared because sometimes, depending on the proof, it can hit you. I'm pretty used to higher proof stuff now, but it can hit you pretty hard. And this one, if I do remember, the proof on this is 121.21. So to break that down, that's 121 proof, which means it's a little over 60% alcohol. Standard Jack Daniels is 40%. So if you think Jack Daniels gives you a little bit of a burn, this is 20% more alcohol, 1/5 more alcohol. So it's pretty high. So let's take a whiff, tilt it up, get your nose in there, leave your mouth open. It'll keep the olfactory a little bit more airflow going through, the scent's coming through. You're not as closed off and tightened, and you're going to have less of a blowback, shoot punch to the face from the whiskey. So this is what we call a fresh pop. So usually when kind of like with wine, right after you open a whiskey, it's very tight, it's very bold. Like the alcohol is sitting right on top. It is not oxygenated at all. So this is going to be pretty tight for us right now. And I'm going to swirl a little bit just to get a little bit of oxygen in there. Some people say this only will waft alcohol into your nose, and it does a little bit. It gets you a little bit of ethanol there, but I think it helps get some oxygen in there, and then you let it sit, and I think it kills some of that ethanol blast. So there we go. I'm getting strong corn, deep, super rich caramels. The alcohol, again, the ethanol is still there. It is prevalent on this fresh pop. The other two I've had open for a little while. Dram Bam just got your Discovery too. Boom. That's good stuff. I'm just about to hop over to that next. But as you keep going back to it, like again, you'll get a little bit more used to it each time. I'm getting some a little bit of fruitier notes. Almost like a light cotton candy is on there too. Just a little bit. Again, this sounds ridiculous. This all sounded ridiculous to me when I first started watching tasting videos and everything. I was like, those guys are freaking nuts. Well, now I'm the nuts guy. Leather and tobacco a little bit in there. And notes like that sound crazy, but seriously, go smell a leather handbag or like a leather jacket, especially a worn one. You'll kind of get that kind of rough, but kind of synthetic smell, but it's like got that natural rubber, like leatherness to it. And tobacco leaf, if you're lucky enough to be around agriculture, the tobacco leaf is kind of this. I have that and like peppery spices kind of going hand in hand. It's just this kind of like natural, almost herbal. Not quite though. A lot of powerful, bold, rich, classic caramel, vanillas, nougat. Yeah, nougat, like in a freaking Snickers bar. And a little bit of dark fruit, but that's less. That's more on the underbelly of it. Now the best part. Cheers, everybody. Let's take a taste of Discovery number 1. Ooh. So, when your first sip of whiskey of the day is 121 proof, it's going to hit you pretty hard. So that first sip got a couple of little, again, some classic notes, but I always take a first sip, swish it around, let it roll over your tongue, envelop your roof of your mouth, the back of your throat, get that burn out of the way a little bit. And so now I've had a little bit of that almost numbing of the tongue, not too much though, because we still want to taste. And so I'm good to go now. And so now I can go back and get a little bit more of an analytical taste. strong vanilla. Super rich Kentucky hug, which is that tingle in your mouth that just like moves all the way. Mainly from tip of the tongue on this one, actually, all rolling all the way to the back. And with a good whiskey, you get a nice, long, lingering finish. That sounds like a euphemism, and I know it does. But the finish in whiskey is like after you've swallowed it, after you've sipped it, it's escaped your mouth. There's like a drying sensation that leaves kind of other flavors on the roof of your mouth, on your cheeks, on the top of your tongue there. I often get that's where a lot of dried fruit, dried cherries, plums, things like that will linger in there. And that's kind of what I'm getting here. The front is mostly like corn, spice, and vanilla. And then as it leaves, there's a lingering, just a little bit of like dark cherries and plum. Really nice drying sensation. Now, for some people, that's pretty hard. Because like they don't like drying. They want it to be just smooth and sweet. And that's great. And there are whiskeys out there for people like that. But I like a nice bitterness, drying sensation. I think it adds some character to the whiskey. I mean, Greg Franklin asking about the burn on that. I mean, it depends. It depends on who you are. Like I said, that was my first sip of alcohol for the day. Normally, I would, if I was drinking something, I would start in the like 90 proof range before I moved up to like a cask strength option. But this just timed out. So that was my first sip of the day, and it was 121 proof. So right off the bat, it's a hell of a kick. But I'm a little bit more used to that than a lot of people are, maybe. But after I had my first kind of initial sip, it makes it a little bit easier because now I'm accustomed to the burn, to the flavor. And I try to look past the burn, and I'm a little bit more used to that now. And this is where I'm trying to really pick out the flavors. And that's what I fell in love with when I started tasting whiskey. Because don't get me wrong, 6 months straight, it was still all, even after I learned to sip neat, it was all burn. It was all like, I can drink it, but holy crap, I taste nothing but fire and a tiny bit of vanilla, maybe. It takes a while to kind of just sit with the whiskey, sit with the drink, and just really think about it. Michael asking, do I smoke cigar? I am not a smoker. My dad does cigars a lot. I'm just not a smoker. I'm going to move on to number 2 while we talk. Never enjoyed it. I enjoy like it's being around it though. Like I've had some drinks in cigar clubs, and I love the sweet smell of the cigar. My dad smokes them. Eric Young from Impact Wrestling, he smokes them. I used to ride with him, and I love the scent of a good cigar. It's so. Some people think cigars can pair very well with certain whiskeys. I find they pair best with cognacs and brandies. Again, not me, but from everyone I talk to and the things I read, you do want a more fruity, sweet, forward whiskey. Often, that's why a lot of like sherry finished cigars are good with it. Or excuse me, sherry finished scotches are good with cigars because there's this kind of bold, sweet fruit to complement the kind of spicy, smoky tobacco. So like you probably wouldn't want to smoke a cigar with a super peaty, smoky Isla Scotch. You know what I mean? That's the difference. So moving on to discovery number 2, they advanced this mash bill is 17% of a 14-year Kentucky bourbon, 39% of a 12-year Kentucky bourbon, and 44% of a 10-year Kentucky. So we are 10 to 14 years in this entire bit of liquid. The color on that is great. Very similar to the last one, kind of a similar age range. And this one is going up just by 1 proof point. We are at 122.2. So now we are at pretty much an even 61% alcohol. Another strong pour. So again, but now see this one. Now this bottle has been open for a few months, and I get much less of the ethanol burn right off the nose. This one, I often find with the higher age, this has a lot, more 14-year-old. And like I said, we're going from 10 to 14 years. So we are at the peak bourbon years in here. And so I find the more it rests in oak, you get almost this. I get a woody kind of nose to it, but a lot of people take grape, almost like this grape medicinaliness that is almost representative of oak for a lot of people. I know in some Weller 12 years, some 12-year wheat whiskey, I just had it and it was 100% cough syrup on the nose. And I've had it several times and that was the first time. So with the way your body changes, your palate changes, you will taste different things over time. That is one of the things that I love about this stuff so much. But this has more fruit, more cherry, plum, almost like stone fruit. But this is almost one of those like all day nosers. Despite the high proof, again, it's been open for a while. There's been some oxygen in it, so it tamed it down a little, opened it up. It's not too shabby on the proof. Yeah, that's really nice. It's the same thing, similar notes, but more of a dark fruit center here. Let's taste. More oak for sure. There's this grapey plumminess to it. Finish is still rolling. Ooh, daddy, all the way down. Again, leaving more of that cherry, dark fruit on the roof of the mouth. This one started more in the middle palate, like the middle of my tongue, as opposed to like the tip of my tongue. It's really, really nice. And I like to swish it around in my mouth because it's almost like some people add an ice cube or add a couple drops of water, which especially with higher proof whiskey can bring out some lighter flavors that might be overpowered by the high alcohol content. You kind of just basically proof it down yourself. But I like to taste it right at cask strength if I can. And then I'll swish it around, almost adding my saliva, which almost waters it down in and of itself. So I can taste it right at cask strength and then immediately swish, 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 swish. I've got it down a couple proof points, and hopefully I maybe get some more notes in one sip. So this one, a lot of similar notes to Discovery number 1, but I find there's a much more round sweetness. There's way more prevalent dark fruit here. Grape and plum, especially like I keep thinking like purple fruits. That's just where like my mind and tongue and everything is going. It's less like strawberry and cherry. It's more of those like deep plum and things like that. So that's those are both really, really good. But that being said, 120 and up is pretty damn high in proof, even for me. And I've been drinking a lot of cask strength and high proof whiskeys for a little while now, which is why I was excited when we got to Discovery number 3. Because again, we're starting at 10 years for the youngest whiskey in here. 10-year Kentucky bourbon is 23% of the blend. Then there's 13-year Kentucky bourbon, which is 32% of the blend. And then most of this bottle, 45%, is a 13-year Indiana bourbon. And so people who know MGP is the likely source, and they are famous for that high rye bourbon that's very sought after. So 13-year bourbon from that distillery is almost half the blend of this bottle. So, and the other thing that got me really excited about it, not only the change in adding in that MGP whiskey, is that they proof this at 110. So this is not batch proof, because you can blend all those barrels together. The proof together probably would have been in the 120s or higher. But I have recently found, as much as I love super, super strong cask strength, because it's uncut, it's raw, it's every bit of flavor that's in there. I found my ideal proof rests somewhere between 100 and 115. So 110 is perfect. It's bold enough to not feel watered down, but it's not so strong that it's going to kick your teeth out with proof. You know what I mean? So here we have our Bardstown Bourbon Company Discovery Series number 3, the most recent one. I don't even know if it's rolled out on every single shelf yet. Check your local liquor stores. Bardstown is in several states. I have to check their website, see if you're in one of them. They're expanding all the time. They're looking to add, I think, 4 or 5 states in the coming year. So your state could be one of them. But again, take a quick look at the color. Very nice. Again, not too different than the other ones. A lot of old whiskey in these. So it's just going to be a nice dark amber. Check out some of the legs. Nothing crazy on this one. That's right, Michael. Yeah. Well, whiskey for the longest time was basically that idea of whiskey and water of life goes all the way back to Latin. I mean, aqua vitae. And visky. It essentially was a V word before we kind of anglicized it and made it a W of whiskey. It's visky, and it's like the aqua vitae. And it was all, I don't know the exact derivation. I should. But it goes all the way back to Latin. It was, they called this the water of life for many, many, many years. This, Scotch is where it really grew prevalent. And right off the bat, this smells different. And you can tell because it's that huge swath of Indiana bourbon, that high rye. And you'll notice, if you really get dorky about it, higher rye content, or even if you have a true 100% rye whiskey, it's a lot more floral, almost herbally, because the rye is that spicy herbal grain as opposed to corn, which is super sweet. So immediately you can smell the herbal floral nature on top of all those sweeter vanilla bourbon, like classic bourbon notes, but just the rye content is much higher than in the rest of these. These are all rye-based bourbons that are blended into all of these, but the rye is so much higher in that Indiana bourbon that makes up more than half of this, that it really makes itself known. And the funny thing is with that rye, with that herbalness, with that almost flowery nature, then, especially with some age on it, keep coming back to it. And oh man, it's almost like cotton candy. It's like bubble gum. There's sweet herbal, brown sugary nose on it. And the 110 makes it a little bit easier to nose. It's not kicking you upside the head as much. That is a fantastic nose. And I see why they think this is the people from the babe's mouth. They think Discovery 3 is one of the best products they've ever put out. And so far, it's hard to disagree. Strong black pepper spice. Strong. Again, there's that sweetness from the corn. Almost as bubblegummy, cotton candy taste. The proof is just right. I'm getting a nice, sweet, warm grab of like the whole inside of my cheeks and on the tongue. And with that super well aged high rye bourbon, it is just a nice, slow, rolling finish. Like hot damn. There's this lovely, it's the sweetness, great peppery spiciness, long lingering finish. And it's all very, very well balanced because most people don't understand the art of blending because American bourbon, especially American whiskey, is so obsessed with like single barrel and, it's 100% straight bourbon from one distillery, which is great. Bottled and bond, it's from one place. It's Jim Beam, whatever. It's Buffalo Trace, whatever, and it's all them. But there's an art to blending. You can't just take a bunch of really good whiskeys, throw them in a tank together, and be like, yeah, this whiskey's good, and that whiskey's good. If you dump all of it in there, it's going to be good, right? It takes careful. How much of this one? How much of that one? Proof it down, proof it up. They go through a long process to put this all together. So the art of blending is still very, 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 very important. Greg asking price point. Price point on all of these, I think, has stayed pretty consistent. Generally, I know here in Illinois, I think it's $129.99 on the shelf. Some retailers, depending on what kind of deal they have with their distributors, might be a little more expensive. If you have like a big box store, it might be a hair less expensive, maybe like $119. But it is in the premium bracket of kind of bottles. And very rarely would I recommend a bottle over $100 because there's so much bourbon. And Bardstown has it too. They have a different blend that's slightly younger that's for like $60. Very rarely will I recommend a bottle over $100. There's few brands and products out there that I think are truly worth more than $100, especially when they're not super old or well put together or anything like that. But these ones, again, I know the team behind it. They care very, very much. They put a big craft. They put a lot of care into choosing the whiskeys that go into the blend. And if you go back and watch, and again, you read everything you want to know is on the side of these labels. And I mean, most of these blends are 10 plus years. And in today's whiskey market, and a whiskey that's 10 years old should be $100-ish anyway, theoretically. $10 a year of aging is the old MO pricing kind of thing. It's not perfect, but so I mean, these have a lot of 12-year, 13-year, 14-year, making up big parts of the blends. So these bottles are some of the few that I would recommend if you're really into whiskey. You want a special bottle that's extremely well crafted. The bottles are beautiful too, very classy. This is worth most people are not going to sell this like at $200, $250. That's the nice thing because it's well priced. If these were, for example, $70 retail, I think there'd be a lot of stores who are going to go, look at what's in this. I'm going to sell this for $150. And people would buy it. That's the sad, unfortunate thing about the whiskey market. There's a lot of brands and stuff like that who their retail price is pretty fair, but then the store owner who has the right to price it whatever they want, they know the market and they know it'll sell out quick, so they'll jack up the price. But this is expensively priced, but it's appropriately priced. $120, $130, I think is very fair for the contents of these glasses. So that was, I know, a long-winded diatribe. We were here talking some whiskey. Kind of went through my step-by-step nosing, tasting thing that I learned from people who I trust, who kind of taught me how to do it. But I'm learning new things all the time. I mean, hot damn, that's now that it's been sitting in the glass and I've had a couple sips and it's just like developed on the glass. I mean, it's pure cotton candy. Like that note never came to me before, but now it's something after years that I'm getting. I mean, like literally like cotton motherfucking candy. Crazy to think that shows up in a corn-based spirit. But these are the things that we get nerdy about. Some people it's video games. That's me too. Some people it's wrestling. Oh, that's me too. But sometimes you find a third passion. So well, I appreciate those of you who jumped in Thanks for coming by. It was just a quick, I wanted to taste through these series because it's been very impressive and I've never done them side by side. So I appreciate you guys being here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I want you guys to have a good night. I want you guys to share a good drink with your friends or family if you're of age. And I want you to, learn more about your favorite passions, your favorite hobbies. Share them with your friends, share them with your family. Find people. Because I never thought I would find people who would be into this like me, because I get really hardcore nerdy about things. But Greg Hamilton from WWE, he's really into it. Baron Corbin was really into it. Talk stuff with them all the time. My dad always liked Scotch, but was never like nerdy about it. And now he's texting me with every bourbon or Scotch or whiskey that comes out that he's picked up or that he's read about. So you never know who you might turn into a fan, because passion breeds passion. That's one thing that I have learned everywhere I've gone. So if you care about something, share it. If you care about something, share about something. Care about it, share about it. And with that, if there's no further ado, cheers, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. Sláinte to my Celtic friends, and have a good night.